Dr. Ethan Carter had seen many strange things in his time working as a xenobiologist and trauma surgeon, but this was something else. The Thalvarine homeworld, Velfar, was like stepping into a different universe. Towering citadels carved from obsidian rock stretched into the sky. Glowing banners of ancient houses fluttered in the toxic winds, and massive armored warriors walked the streets with blades longer than a human arm. Humans were rare here. The Thalvarine were one of the most powerful warrior species in the galaxy. They believed in strength above all else, and Ethan had been warned more than once that they did not respect healers, only those who fought and conquered. Still, Ethan had accepted the invitation to be part of the intergalactic medical exchange program. He was here to study their biology, to understand their unique physiology, and, if possible, to change their views on medicine. What he hadn't expected was to be dragged into royal matters. The urgent call had come in the middle of the night. A group of heavily armed Thalvarine warriors stormed into the medical ward where Ethan was working, their massive forms casting long shadows over him. Their leader, a scared veteran named Commander Jorvac, barked out an order. "The princess is dying. You will save her." Ethan barely had time to grab his medical kit before he was shoved into a transport ship. As they flew over the dark city, he tried to ask questions. "What happened to her?" he asked. Jorvac grunted. "Cowards attacked her. Poison blade. No Thalvarine medicine can cure her." That made Ethan frown. The Thalvarine had advanced medical technology, but they relied heavily on regeneration serums and nanite-enhanced healing. If none of that worked, then the poison was something unusual. The ship landed outside a massive fortress, and Ethan was hurried inside. The palace was grand yet brutal. Dark stone walls lined with weapons, banners depicting great battles, and statues of long-dead warlords standing as silent watchers. At the center of the great hall, surrounded by worried nobles and grim-faced guards, lay Princess Vera. Ethan's breath caught for a moment. She was unlike any Thalvarine he had seen before. Tall, strong, and regal, her dark silver skin shimmered under the torchlight. Her long braided hair spread over the stone floor, and her battle armor had been removed to reveal a deep wound on her side. The skin around it had turned black and veined, a sign of spreading poison. Her breathing was shallow. Her pulse was weak, and the Thalvarine doctors looked helpless. Ethan didn't hesitate. He dropped to his knees beside her and opened his medical kit. "I need space," he barked, but no one moved. The warriors were used to taking orders, but not from a soft-spoken human. So Ethan did something that no one expected. He reached into his bag, pulled out a laser scalpel, and stabbed himself in the arm, just a small cut. The warriors tensed, but he held up his bleeding hand. "See this? This is what I do. I fix wounds. I save lives." He wiped the blood on his sleeve. "Now move back and let me work." For a moment, there was silence. Then, surprisingly, King Torvath, the ruler of Velfar, nodded. "Let the human try." The warriors stepped back. Ethan got to work. First, he scanned her body. The poison was not natural. It was a synthetic compound, designed to block cell regeneration. That's why the Thalvarine doctors couldn't fix her. Their healing serums relied on rapid cell repair, and the poison was stopping it completely. Ethan muttered under his breath. Clever, but not clever enough. He pulled out a vial from his kit, a universal antitoxin mixed with nanite purifiers. He had designed it back on Earth for extreme cases of nerve toxins. It wasn't perfect, but it was the best shot she had. The real challenge was delivering it. The poison had already slowed her heart rate. If he injected the antitoxin too fast, her system would collapse. Too slow, and the poison would reach her brain. There was only one way: direct heart injection. Ethan grabbed a long syringe and took a deep breath. "Hold her steady," he said. Two warriors held Vera's shoulders. Ethan positioned the needle right above her heart. He pushed down. For a second, nothing happened. Then, her body convulsed. The warriors growled, reaching for their weapons, but Ethan yelled, "Don't touch her. She's fighting it." Vera's breathing hitched. Her fingers clenched into fists. The black veins on her skin slowly began to fade. Ethan exhaled in relief. It was working. The antitoxin was flushing the poison out. Minutes passed. Then Vera's eyes fluttered open. Her golden irises locked onto Ethan. She didn't look weak anymore. She looked angry. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice hoarse. Ethan smiled, exhaustion hitting him. "Your doctor." The room was silent. Then the king laughed, a deep booming sound. "The human has saved my daughter," Vath declared. "A great debt is owed." Ethan was just about to say it was his job, when the king grinned and added, "And so, as our tradition demands, he shall be rewarded." The warriors cheered. Ethan frowned. Why did he have a bad feeling about this? Dr. Ethan Carter had been in difficult situations before. Emergency surgeries, alien diseases, battlefield injuries, but nothing had prepared him for what was happening now. The great hall of the Thalvirine Palace was filled with cheering warriors. Princess Vera, the same alien woman he had saved just moments ago, was now sitting upright, alive and well. The poison was gone, her breathing had returned to normal, and her golden eyes were burning with intensity. At the center of the celebration, King Vath stood tall, his armored hand resting on the hilt of his ceremonial blade. He looked at Ethan with something the doctor hadn't seen before: approval. Then the king spoke. "Human, you have done a great thing this day. You have saved the blood of the royal line. And for that, a great debt is owed." Ethan nodded, still catching his breath. "I'm just glad she's alive." Vath grinned. "Yes, and now you shall be rewarded." Ethan finally allowed himself to relax. Maybe they would give him some kind of medal or honorary title. Maybe he would get access to better research facilities. Maybe. As tradition demands, the one who saves the life of the royal bloodline is granted the greatest gift of all. The king turned to the crowd. "He shall be given my daughter's hand in marriage." The hall erupted in cheers. Ethan's brain stopped working for a moment. He was sure he had misheard something. "I'm sorry. What?" he said, blinking. "A life saved is a life bound," Vath declared proudly. "The princess is yours. From this moment on, you are her mate." Ethan felt dizzy. The princess was staring at him, her expression unreadable. The warriors around them were pounding their fists against their chests in approval. This had to be a cultural misunderstanding. "Wait, hold on." Ethan raised his hands. "I think there's been a mistake. I didn't save her life for a reward. I did it because I'm a doctor. That's my job." Vath's grin faded slightly. "And yet, the debt remains. You refuse." The cheering stopped. The hall grew silent. The Thalvirine warriors stared at him. Some placed their hands on their weapons, as if his words were an insult. Ethan's pulse quickened. He had spent months studying Thalvirine culture, but he had clearly missed something important. He turned to Princess Vera. Do you have anything to say about this?" The princess had been watching him closely. Now she slowly stood up, towering over him. Her golden eyes locked onto his, studying his reaction. Finally, she spoke. "I do not need a mate forced upon me," she said. Her voice was calm, but there was an edge of irritation in it. "But a life debt cannot be ignored." Ethan exhaled. "Good. So maybe we can just call it even." Vath frowned. "That is not our way." Vera crossed her arms. "Then let him prove himself." The king raised an eyebrow. "Prove himself?" Vera nodded. "If he truly wishes to refuse, then let him earn his freedom." The trial of worthiness. A ripple of excitement passed through the gathered warriors. Ethan's stomach sank. That didn't sound good. "And if I pass this trial?" he asked carefully. Vera smirked slightly. Then you will have the right to refuse without dishonor. Torvath chuckled. Clever. Very well. Human, you shall undergo the trial of worthiness. If you succeed, you may leave as a free man. If you fail, then you shall accept the bond as tradition demands. Ethan rubbed his face. He was a doctor, not a warrior. What kind of trial was this going to be? Still, he knew he didn't have much of a choice. If he simply refused now, he would insult the entire royal family. And judging by the way the Thal warriors were eyeing him, that would not end well for him. So he took a deep breath and straightened his back. Fine. I'll do it. The warriors roared in approval. Vera's smirk widened, just a little. Good, she said. Then prepare yourself, human. The trials begin tomorrow. Ethan sighed. What had he just gotten himself into? The next morning, Ethan woke up to the sound of metallic drums echoing through the palace halls. He sat up quickly, rubbing his eyes, trying to remember where he was. Right. He was on Velfar. He had saved the princess's life, and now, because of some ancient warrior tradition, he had to prove himself in a trial to avoid being forced into marriage. He groaned. I should have just stayed on Earth. A loud knock at the door made him jump. The door slid open, and Commander Jorvac stepped inside, his massive armored figure blocking the light. His face showed mild amusement, as if he enjoyed watching Ethan struggle. The trial of worthiness begins soon, human. Jorvac smirked. Eat quickly. You will need your strength. Ethan sighed and got up. He didn't know what kind of trial this was going to be, but he had a strong feeling it wouldn't involve medical knowledge or scientific reasoning. The first trial, the path of strength. Ethan was led into a massive stone arena just outside the palace. The place was ancient, filled with towering statues of past warlords and warriors. Hundreds of Thal had gathered around, watching eagerly. At the center of the arena stood Princess Vera, wearing her full battle armor. She looked at Ethan, her golden eyes filled with something between curiosity and amusement. The first trial is simple, she said. You must cross the path of strength. Ethan followed her gaze and saw a long stone bridge stretching over a deep pit. The bridge itself was narrow and broken in several places, with swinging metal blades and shifting platforms. At the other end of the bridge stood a massive Thal warrior, gripping a long staff. Ethan frowned. Let me guess, he's going to try and knock me off. Vera nodded. Yes, the strong cross. The weak fall. Ethan sighed. Fantastic. The crowd cheered as he stepped forward. The moment he set foot on the bridge, the warrior at the other end charged forward, his staff swinging in a wide arc. Ethan ducked, just barely, and the wind from the attack whistled past his head. He staggered backward, nearly losing his balance. Okay, he muttered. I am definitely not winning this with strength. The warrior attacked again, this time aiming lower. Instead of trying to block or counter, Ethan did something unexpected. He dodged to the side and let the warrior's own momentum carry him forward. The warrior stumbled slightly, giving Ethan just enough time to sprint past him. The crowd gasped. The warrior spun around, growling, and lunged at Ethan again. But Ethan was faster, using the broken parts of the bridge to jump across gaps and avoid direct attacks. As he reached the final section, the warrior made one last desperate strike. Ethan dropped to the ground, sliding beneath the blow, and rolled to the other side. He was across. The crowd erupted into cheers and laughter. Ethan was breathing hard, his heart pounding, but he had made it. Vera watched him carefully. There was a hint of approval in her expression. Interesting, she said. You do not fight like a warrior. Ethan wiped sweat from his forehead. Yeah, because I'm not one. She smirked. And yet you passed. The second trial. The Hunt of Cunning. The second trial was held in a dense jungle outside the city. The challenge was simple: track and capture a wild Velkar beast, a massive reptilian predator with razor-sharp claws. Ethan knew immediately that fighting it head-on was suicide. Instead, he did what humans did best. He used his brain. While the Thalvarine warriors ran through the jungle hunting with brute force, Ethan took a different approach. He observed the environment, studied the tracks and movements of the beast, and set a trap using the natural terrain. When the Velkar beast charged at him, Ethan didn't run. He led it straight into a mud pit, where its own weight caused it to sink. The beast roared and thrashed, but it was stuck. Ethan casually walked up and tapped its nose. "Tag, you're it." The Thalvarine warriors who had been watching stood in stunned silence. Vera, standing nearby, raised an eyebrow. "You are not the strongest," she admitted, "but you are clever." Ethan smirked. "I'll take that as a compliment." The third trial, the Battle of Will. For the final challenge, Ethan was taken to a massive underground chamber filled with scorching heat. In front of him was a large table with 2 seats. Vera sat across from him. "The last trial is endurance," she said. "A contest of will. We drink the fire mead and see who lasts longer." Ethan frowned. Fire mead. Jorvac handed him a metal cup filled with a thick, glowing red liquid. Ethan sniffed it. His eyes watered instantly. "This is lava, isn't it?" Vera smirked. "Drink." Ethan sighed. He had survived alien poisons, surgeries, and battles. He wasn't going to lose a drinking contest. He lifted the cup and took a deep gulp. Instantly, his throat burned like a supernova. His vision blurred. His skin tingled. But he clenched his teeth and kept drinking. Vera watched him closely as she took a sip. Seconds passed, then minutes. Ethan refused to fall. And finally, after a long silence, Vera set her cup down. "Enough," she said. "You have passed." The warriors roared in approval. Ethan gasped for air, barely able to feel his tongue. "I'm never drinking that again." Vera laughed softly. "You may not be the strongest, but you are worthy." Ethan blinked. "Wait, does that mean I still have to marry you?" Ethan Carter sat in the grand hall once again, feeling completely exhausted. His body ached from the trial of strength. His mind was still recovering from the trial of cunning, and his tongue felt like it had been set on fire from the trial of will. But he had survived. The Thalvarine warriors surrounded him, their cheers echoing off the high stone walls. They clapped their fists to their chests, honoring his victory. He had proven himself, something no outsider had done before. At the center of the celebration stood King Torvath. The massive ruler looked at Ethan with a mixture of pride and expectation. Beside him, Princess Vera stood with her arms crossed, her golden eyes watching him carefully. "Human." The king's voice boomed. "You have passed the trials. You have shown strength, cunning, and endurance. You are worthy." Ethan, still rubbing his sore shoulders, gave a weak smile. "Great. So I can go now." The hall fell silent. Vera's expression didn't change, but her fingers tightened slightly around the hilt of her sword. Torvath narrowed his eyes. "Go. Why would you leave?" Ethan hesitated. "I thought the trials were to earn my right to refuse." Torvath tilted his head. "No, the trials were to prove that you are not unworthy." Ethan felt his stomach drop. "Wait, so even after all that, I still have to marry the princess?" A murmur ran through the gathered warriors. Some looked confused, others seemed amused. Vera, for the first time, looked surprised. She stepped forward. "You would still refuse?" Ethan scratched the back of his head. "Look, it's not about you. You're obviously great and all, but marriage is a big thing for humans. It's supposed to be a choice, not a reward." Torvath frowned. "You would dishonor my daughter." Ethan felt a wave of tension fill the hall. The warriors were gripping their weapons now. He had seen this kind of situation before. One wrong word, and he wouldn't be leaving this palace alive. He raised his hands. No, no dishonor. I just think maybe she should have a choice too. The warriors glanced at Vera. The princess remained silent for a long moment. Then, to Ethan's surprise, she nodded. He speaks truth. Torvath turned to her. Daughter, you accept this. Vera exhaled. He fought well. He proved himself. But forcing a bond is not the way of warriors. She looked at Ethan. If I must choose a mate, I will choose one who stays willingly. Ethan blinked. Did she just defend him? Torvath let out a deep chuckle. Ha! The human has changed you, daughter. Vera smirked. Or perhaps I was always like this. The king nodded slowly, then turned back to Ethan. Very well, human. The choice is yours. Ethan let out a deep breath of relief. He had won. He could finally go back to his normal life. But as he looked around the great hall, the warriors who had cheered for him, the king who had acknowledged him, and the princess who had defended his choice, something inside him felt strange. He had earned their respect. Vera watched him carefully. So, will you leave? Ethan opened his mouth. The answer should have been simple. But was it? He had spent years traveling the galaxy, working as a doctor in dangerous places. He had saved lives, fought against impossible odds. And now, he had found a place where he mattered. More importantly, he had found someone who understood him. Vera was strong, smart, and fearless. She wasn't just a warrior. She was a leader, a protector of her people. And yet, she had been willing to let him go. Ethan took a deep breath. Then he smiled. Actually, I think I'll stay a little longer. The hall erupted into cheers once more. Vera raised an eyebrow, but there was the faintest hint of a smile on her lips. Torvath laughed loudly. Then drink, human. Tonight, we celebrate. Ethan sighed as another cup of fire mead was shoved into his hands. I really need to stop doing this. The celebration in the great hall lasted late into the night. Alien drums pounded, warriors drank and laughed, and the scent of roasted meat filled the air. Ethan sat at the long banquet table, watching the festivities with a strange feeling in his chest. He had planned to leave, to return to his old life as a doctor traveling from planet to planet. But instead, he had chosen to stay. And the more he thought about it, the more he realized he didn't regret it. Princess Vera sat across from him, drinking from a metal cup. She studied him with her sharp golden eyes. You are thinking too much. Ethan blinked. What? She smirked. You keep looking around as if questioning your own choice. He sighed. Yeah, well, this wasn't exactly in my life plan. Vera tilted her head. And what was? Ethan chuckled. Traveling, helping people, saving lives. He took a sip of water, shaking his head. Not fighting alien warriors for marriage rights. Vera laughed softly. You are different from the men of my world. I'll take that as a compliment. Ethan smirked. The princess nodded. It is. Most Thalverine seek power, strength, legacy, but you seek something else. Ethan leaned back, watching as the warriors around them celebrated. And what about you? You don't seem like someone who just follows tradition blindly. Vera's expression grew more serious. She set her drink down and gazed at the flickering torches around the hall. No, I do not. Ethan could hear something heavy in her voice. Before he could ask more, a loud horn echoed through the hall. The celebrations stopped immediately. The warriors turned toward the entrance as Commander Jorvac stormed inside, his face tense. My king, he called, bowing before Torvath. A fleet has entered our space. It is the Drekker. The hall was suddenly silent. Ethan frowned. Who? Vera's face darkened. Pirates. Slavers. Enemies of our people. Torvath rose to his feet, his voice cold and commanding. How many ships? Jorvak's expression was grim. 20. They are demanding tribute. Ethan's stomach twisted. He knew exactly what that meant. The Drekker weren't just pirates. They were raiders who enslaved weaker species. If they were demanding tribute, it meant they wanted slaves, weapons, and resources. And if the Thal refused, they would attack. Vera clenched her fists. We must prepare for battle. Torvath nodded. Summon the War Council. A dangerous plan. Ethan followed Vera and Jorvak into the war chamber, a massive room filled with glowing maps and holograms of the planet. The fleet of Drekker ships hung over the outskirts of the system, waiting. Torvath pointed to the hologram. We cannot fight them directly. Our fleet is smaller. A warrior slammed his fist on the table. We will not bow to them. Vera's voice was firm. No, we will not. She looked at the map, thinking. But we need a strategy. Ethan watched, his mind racing. He might not be a warrior, but he knew one thing. This wasn't just a fight. It was survival. He stepped forward. What if we don't fight them head-on? The warriors turned to him, confused. Vera raised an eyebrow. Explain. Ethan took a deep breath. The Drekker are here for easy prey, right? They expect you to either surrender or fight with brute strength. He pointed to a nearby moon on the map. But what if we lure them into a trap? Jorvak frowned. A trap? Ethan nodded. If we can make them think they've cornered you, we can use the terrain. Asteroids, gravity fields, anything, to weaken them before the battle even starts. Torvath stroked his chin. You suggest we deceive them. Vera smirked. Clever, like in the trials. Ethan shrugged. Hey, it worked before. The room was silent for a moment. Then, the king nodded slowly. Very well, human. We shall try your plan. The battle begins. Hours later, Ethan stood on the bridge of the command ship, watching as the Drekker fleet moved closer. Everything was set. The Thal fleet was positioned near the moon, using its magnetic storms as cover. The Drekker hailed them. A massive, scared alien appeared on the screen, his sharp teeth glinting. Thal, surrender your tribute or be destroyed. Torvath stepped forward. Come and take it, if you dare. The Drekker leader laughed. As you wish. The enemy ships surged forward, right into the trap. As soon as they entered the magnetic storm, their shields flickered. Their targeting systems failed. The Thal struck hard, launching precise attacks. The Drekker fleet panicked, realizing too late that they had been outmaneuvered. Ethan gripped the console, watching as the battle turned in their favor. It's working. Vera grinned. Your strategy was wise, human. One by one, the enemy ships fell, forced to retreat. The battle was won. As the last Drekker ship fled the system, the Thal warriors cheered. Ethan exhaled, his heart pounding. He had come to this world as a doctor, but now he was part of something more. Vera turned to him, her expression unreadable. You fought for us. Ethan smiled. Of course. What else was I gonna do? Let you all get captured. For the first time, Vera truly smiled. And in that moment, Ethan realized something. Maybe, just maybe, he had found his place after all. The battlefield was silent now, except for the distant hum of the remaining ships. The Drekker fleet had fled, leaving behind only the wreckage of their fallen ships. Ethan stood on the command deck, his body still tense from the battle. He could hardly believe it. They had won. Vera stepped beside him, her armor scratched but her golden eyes burning with victory. You did well, human. Ethan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. I can't believe that actually worked. Torvath let out a deep laugh. Your strategy saved many warriors today. You have earned honor. The Thal warriors around them thumped their chests in respect. a gesture Ethan was starting to understand. Jorvac, the battle-hardened commander, stepped forward. You are more than a doctor, Ethan Carter. You are a warrior in your own way. Ethan shook his head. I just used my brain. You all did the real fighting. Vera smirked. Strategy is as important as strength. Ethan glanced at her. There was something different in the way she looked at him now. Before, she had seen him as an outsider, a weak human forced into their traditions. But now, there was respect in her gaze. And something else. Back at the palace. After the victory, the warriors returned to the capital, greeted with cheers and celebration. The people of Thal honored their champions, and to Ethan's surprise, they honored him too. Vera stood beside him as they walked through the city. They see you as one of us now. Ethan chuckled. That's still weird to hear. She tilted her head. And yet you stayed. You chose to fight for us. He paused, looking around at the people, children running, elders bowing in respect, warriors nodding in approval. He had spent years drifting across the galaxy, saving lives, but never belonging anywhere. But here, he felt something different. Purpose. Belonging. Vera's voice was softer now. Do you regret staying? Ethan looked at her and smiled. Not for a second. She held his gaze for a moment before turning away. Good. A new challenge. The celebration continued deep into the night. The warriors gathered in the palace hall, sharing stories, drinking, and honoring their fallen. Ethan sat with Vera at the high table, enjoying the rare moment of peace. But then, the doors of the hall slammed open. A figure stepped inside, his armor gleaming under the torchlight. He was tall, powerful, and carried himself like a man who owned the room. His piercing red eyes scanned the hall before locking onto Ethan. Vera's expression hardened. Oh no. Ethan glanced at her. Who is that? She sighed. My betrothed. Ethan nearly choked on his drink. Wait. What? The warrior strode forward, his heavy boots echoing in the hall. He stopped before the high table and slammed his fist against his chest. I am Vornrak, champion of the blood clans. Ethan already didn't like him. Torvath leaned forward, his voice firm. You arrive unannounced. Vornrak. Vornrak ignored the king, his gaze fixed on Ethan. This human is unworthy of standing beside the princess. Ethan sighed. Oh, here we go again. Vera's hand tightened on the hilt of her sword. I did not call for you, Vornrak. Vornrak smirked. I come not because you called, but because I will not allow this outsider to insult our traditions. Ethan groaned. Look, buddy, I didn't ask for any of this. Vornrak's eyes narrowed. Yet you remain. You fight beside her. You stand in her father's hall. You have no claim here. Ethan crossed his arms. And yet, I helped win a battle you weren't even here for. The hall fell silent. The warriors whispered amongst themselves. Vornrak's face darkened. A battle does not make you worthy. He turned to Torvath. My king, I demand the right of challenge. Ethan blinked. The what now? Vera growled. He seeks combat. A duel. Torvath sighed, rubbing his temple. The right of challenge has long been our way, but I will not force the human to fight. Vornrak's smirk returned. Then he admits his weakness. Ethan rolled his eyes. Oh, real original. Vera turned to him, her voice low. You do not have to do this. I can handle him myself. Ethan looked at her, then at the warriors watching, then at Vornrak, the smug warrior who had arrived only after the battle was won, demanding his place. Ethan sighed. What are the rules? Vera's eyes widened. Ethan, you do not have to. I want to. Torvath leaned forward, intrigued. The duel is not to the death. First to submit loses. Ethan cracked his neck. All right then. Vornrak grinned. You are a fool, human. Ethan smirked. Maybe, But let's find out. The warriors cheered. The duel was set. As Ethan stood up, Vera grabbed his arm. "You are not a warrior." He smiled at her. "No, but I've learned a few things." Vera's fingers tightened, then slowly released. "Do not lose." Ethan chuckled. "I wasn't planning to." The duel was about to begin. The training ground inside the palace was packed. Warriors lined the arena, their eyes fixed on the two figures standing in the center. The air was thick with tension. Ethan rolled his shoulders, his body still sore from the battle with the Drekker. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a fighter. But here he was, about to duel the biggest, meanest alien warrior he had ever seen. Vornrak stood across from him, flexing his muscles and cracking his knuckles. "You should leave now, human, before you embarrass yourself." Ethan smirked. "Oh, I'd love to. But you called me out in front of everyone, so here we are." Torvath raised a hand. "The rules are simple. First to submit loses." His gaze moved between them. "Begin." The moment the word left the king's mouth, Vornrak charged. Ethan barely had time to react before the massive alien swung a fist the size of a hammer. He ducked just in time, feeling the wind rush past his head. Whoa! Vornrak was fast, too fast for someone that big. Ethan needed to be smarter. He couldn't win by brute force. So he played to his strengths. Vornrak swung again, and this time Ethan sidestepped and let the warrior's own momentum carry him forward. The alien stumbled for half a second, just enough time for Ethan to strike. With everything he had, Ethan delivered a sharp kick to the back of Vornrak's knee. The warrior grunted but didn't fall. Instead, he turned, eyes burning. "You fight like a coward." Ethan grinned. "I fight to win." Vornrak lunged again, this time aiming to grab him. Ethan knew if the alien got a hold of him, it was over. So instead of running, he did the unexpected. He rushed forward. Vornrak wasn't ready. Ethan ducked under his arms and slammed his elbow into the warrior's ribs. The alien grunted, but this time he caught Ethan's arm. "Got you." Ethan's eyes widened as Vornrak lifted him like a ragdoll and threw him across the arena. He hit the ground hard, rolling to absorb the impact. Pain shot through his body, but he forced himself to stand. Vornrak laughed. "Stay down, human." Ethan wiped the dirt from his face and shook his head. "Not happening." Vera watched from the sidelines, her fists clenched. "Come on, Ethan." Vornrak rushed again, but this time Ethan was ready. As the alien swung, Ethan dodged left, then right. He wasn't attacking, just moving, frustrating his opponent. Vornrak growled, "Fight me properly." Ethan saw his chance. The warrior was getting angry. That meant he was getting reckless. As Vornrak lunged for a final, crushing blow, Ethan did something completely unexpected. He dropped to the ground, sliding between the alien's legs. Before Vornrak could react, Ethan leaped onto his back and locked his arms around his throat. A chokehold. The crowd gasped. Vornrak roared, thrashing wildly, trying to shake Ethan off. But Ethan had fought enough tough patients in emergency rooms to know how to hold on for dear life. The warrior's movements grew slower. His arms flailed, then weakened. Finally, his knees buckled, and he collapsed to the ground. The arena was silent. Torvath stepped forward, observing the fallen warrior. He turned to Ethan. "Release him." Ethan let go, stepping back and breathing heavily. Vornrak gasped for air, but the fight was over. The king raised a hand. "The human is victorious." The warriors erupted into cheers. Ethan stumbled backward, feeling a hand on his arm. He turned to see Vera, looking at him with something new in her eyes. Pride. And something deeper. "You won," she said softly. Ethan smirked, still catching his breath. "Of course. What else was I gonna do?" A final decision. Vornrak left the palace in shame. No warrior would challenge Ethan again. He had earned his place through wit, strategy, and determination. But that wasn't the biggest change. That night, Ethan stood with Vera on the palace balcony, looking over the city. The sky was filled with stars, and the world felt peaceful for the first time in days. Vera broke the silence. "You could leave now, if you wanted." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You trying to get rid of me?" She smiled, a rare, real smile. "No, I am saying you have earned the right to choose." Ethan sighed, looking up at the stars. He had always dreamed of traveling the galaxy, of never staying in one place too long. But now, he looked at Vera, at the warriors, at the people. He had saved a princess, helped win a war, earned the respect of a kingdom, and somehow he had found a home. He turned to Vera and smiled. "I think I'll stick around." Her golden eyes shimmered in the moonlight. "Good." As the stars shone above, Ethan knew his adventure wasn't over. It was only just beginning.